When you hear the word beautiful, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it an object? A place? A person? If you said person, I want you to picture what this person looks like. What does beautiful look like to you? We often think of beauty as some innate concept, some immutable feature of life that humans are attuned to and appreciate uniquely. What discussions of beauty often lack is a consideration of the structural purpose of beauty. Beauty is not just a nebulous idea. Most often, it's weaponized. In an unequal society, the standard of beauty is set up to validate the identity of the dominant group and exclude the oppressed group. Not only that, but ugliness is cast as a moral failure and serves to demonize the oppressed group. Today, we're going to be discussing counternarratives of beauty, more specifically tackling beauty as a tool of white supremacy, defining beauty decolonially, and centering people of color. The piece that inspired this podcast is a chapter written by sociologist Tressie McMillan-Katom called In the Name of Beauty, from her 2019 book Thick and Other Essays. In her essay, Katom explains why she, as a Black woman, calls herself unattractive, and why she won't aspire to beauty or contort its social definition to fit her better. It was a revolutionary read for me, and it's going to inform and motivate a lot of the points in today's episode, but we'll come back to it in a bit. First, we need to lay a frame of reference. When discussing counternarratives, it's important to identify the master narrative. The master narrative of beauty in the US and the Western world overall is whiteness. Lighter skin, long, straight or wavy hair, preferably of lighter color, light eyes with no epicanthic fold or monolid, a sloped, straight or button nose with a prominent bridge and rounded but small nostrils. If you want to tan yourself to be darker than a lighter-skinned Black person, go ahead. Just make sure you're not actually Black. In other words, features are looked at in compound, so certain deviations from the standard are allowed, as long as you otherwise signal whiteness. We see that a lot today with the appropriation of Black beauty standards and practices by predominantly white people. These beauty standards, comprising this master narrative, are adhered to strongly. Beauty and appearance are of high societal value, and those who don't fit the standard are chastised or worse. In Chapter 7 of our textbook, Introduction to Ethnic Studies by Fisher et al., we discuss George Lipshitz's idea of possessive investment in whiteness. In other words, how white people are pushed to buy into the narrative of whiteness and strengthen it. Chapter author Teresa Hodges writes how possessive investment in whiteness requires a normalization of whiteness, such as white as the standard of beauty. So keep that in mind as we discuss the structural power of beauty. Now that we've defined the master narrative, let's switch our focus to counternarratives. One popular counternarrative that's arisen in recent years is the Black Girl Magic movement. The term was coined by Kashawn Thompson in 2013 on Twitter. The movement sprung up as a response to widespread media maligning of Black women, with the idea of reminding everyone that Blackness and Black womanhood is something wondrous and positive, countering the hypermasculinization and hypersexualization that Black women face. Thompson stated in an interview with Medium magazine that so many of my fellow Black women felt loved and validated by that hashtag. Hashtag Black Girls Are Magic, and later, the truncated hashtag Black Girl Magic became a rallying cry and affirmation for Black women all over. I want to now play an excerpt from a BuzzFeed video interviewing Black women on what Black Girl Magic means to them.
First time I heard Black Girl Magic, it made me feel tied to all the brown girls around the world.
I think it's the way we walk. I think it's the way we dress.
I think Black Girl Magic is something, a spark almost, something extra, a little oomph that we put into everything that we do.
When you see a Black woman, you see all of Black culture.
Black Girl Magic.
I also want to talk more about the experiences that shape Black girls and where the need for movements like Black Girl Magic come from. Researcher Tracy Baxley did a long-term study in 2014 titled Taking Off the Rose-Colored Glasses, Exposing Colorism Through Counternarratives. She met weekly with Black female teenagers to discuss literature, representation in literature, and the identities and experiences of the students. I want to discuss some of the excerpts from her meetings and why they matter. Most relevantly, Baxley writes that, quote-unquote, critical race theory offers counter-narratives as a means to recognize and legitimize the perspectives of traditionally marginalized groups of people, in this case dark-skinned adolescent girls. Counter-narratives provide a stage for the Black adolescent girls in the study to name their reality and express their story. One girl, Samantha, says in a discussion, "How do they tell us what is beautiful? How do they get the power to tell us that our kinky hair, big noses, thick lips, and curvy hips are unattractive or wrong in some way?" Samantha then references Crystal Waters by Walter Dean Myers, a book where a character says, quote, "Honey, you're so beautiful and fresh that he doesn't see you as black," end quote. These girls are potently aware of how they are excluded not only from society at large, but within their own communities due to colorism, texturism, etc. Those are topics that deserve a whole podcast or book of their own, so we're only going to touch lightly on it. But the girls reference how in both the literature they've been dissecting and in their own families, lighter features or those proximal to whiteness are prioritized. When asked to define what they see as beautiful, the girls have mixed responses. I wrote weave, light-skinned, tall, and skinny. I know it sounds bad. At least I'm now thinking and questioning my definition. One girl, Ava, then says, "Well, I'm not much better. I wrote when your hair and nails are done, having straight, long hair, and when your makeup is on." Melissa, are you all serious? Okay, sorry. I guess I appreciate the honesty, but we really need to keep talking about this. I think beauty is how you see yourself, not how others define you. I don't want to be a part of the problem of internalized racism. Me and my brown face and natural fro are doing just fine. End of discussion. Overall, Baxley found that the reading group helped the girls not only express their feelings, but step up to the plate to combat the issue, having difficult conversations with family members and revolutionizing their own standards for beauty. Their counter-narratives both dissuade harmful notions and empower them in their communities. I also want to quickly discuss, because we're limited to 10 minutes, it's going to be quick, some indigenous counter-narratives to beauty. In our textbook, we talk in Chapter 4 about indigenous ways of knowing, defined as, quote, "the way of knowing that a band or tribe of people accumulates over generations of living in and experiencing a specific environment, resulting in them making sense of their world," end quote. We also ground our textbook in Section 2.2 with Native American pedagogies for approaching ethnic studies. I want to bridge that knowledge and structure also to conceptualizations of identity and beauty. Philosopher Brendan Hokowitu, in a piece on indigenous existentialism and the body, writes that, quote, "For indigenous communities, subcultures developed throughout much of the 20th century based on a relationship with a physically laboring body that, in turn, has come to symbolize traditional indigenous cultures. For instance, the relationship between physical labor and sport with the Maori male body has determined a traditional Maori masculinity symbolically reified within the physical realm." End quote. Investigating philosophies from different indigenous communities that depart from typical Western Enlightenment thinking may provide us with more counter-narratives to the idea of and ultimate importance of beauty and physical appearance. Alternatively, some examples of beauty standards from an indigenous culture include that of the Chamorro people of the Guamanian archipelago, who stained their teeth black and red as a symbol of beauty, or a young Oaxacan man I came across on Instagram who posts about finding pride in his unambiguously indigenous features, like his dark skin and strong curved nose. Lastly, I want to talk about the counter-narrative that I think is most important, most cutting, and that inspired this piece. If I knew to be cautious of men, I did not learn early enough to be cautious of white women. After that, Tressie McMillan Katom describes a bit how, growing up as a dark-skinned girl, white female authority figures constantly framed her body as deviant and dangerous, distracting and sexual. As she grew up into diverse school environments, she still learned that, quote, "nothing was more beautiful than blonde," and that, quote, "a whole other culture of desirability had been playing out just above and beyond my awareness." I think she touches on the really important point that beauty standards are not innate, they're taught. And oftentimes you may not be fully exposed to these rigid standards until you enter a different environment, which brings to mind how colonization radically changed the structure of so many colonized societies. It tells us that beauty is this imposed, harmful thing. Katam is really showing here how she interacted with the master narrative, but then she also goes on to talk about how attending a historically black university she felt more desired, and that she didn't stand fully excluded from the status quo. She says that there she could, quote, be a kind of beautiful, normal, normative, taken for granted as desirable. So while this poses kind of a counter-narrative to the master narrative, there's a great point here that links to something else she said. Beauty isn't actually what you look like. Beauty is the preferences that reproduce the existing social order. So whether you're beautiful also really depends on the power dynamics and demographic of your environment. Ultimately, Katam talks a lot about how she doesn't aspire to be beautiful. She's not interested in buying into this system. So I think that's a good grounding in regards to body neutrality and asking ourselves at the end point of revolutionizing beauty standards, regardless of how egalitarian we may make them, whether beauty is something we want to invest in, whether it's a currency we want to bet on or against. I want to end with a longer quote from Katam that I think really encapsulates her perspective. When I say that I am unattractive, concede that I am ugly, the antithesis of beauty, I sound like I am internalizing a white standard of beauty that black women fight hard to rise above. But my truth is quite the opposite. When oppressed people become complicit in their oppression, joining the dominant class in their ideas about what we are, it is symbolic violence. When I say that I am unattractive or ugly, I am not internalizing the dominant culture's assessment of me. I am naming what has been done to me and signaling who did it. That's my call to action for you. Beauty is not just a concept. It's a process. It's alive and active. It's impressionable and manipulable. Be critical of beauty standards, of the power structures they reproduce. And instead of just imagining what beautiful means to you, start imagining what you mean outside of beauty. Thanks for listening, and that's all for today.